Hello and welcome back to Redirected. My name is Andrew East, and this is a show where we sit down with celebrities, athletes, entrepreneurs, really anybody who has experienced a pivot or change in life. I call these changes redirections, and at some point or another, we all go through them. So I wanted to sit down with people who have made it through these changes well in order to glean their wisdom, but also hear some pretty good stories. And today we're continuing our Forbes 30 Under 30 series. We're sitting down with people who are redirecting the future and have visions of something much better, of a better future, if you will. And we sit down with Jeremy Fall, who is an impressive entrepreneur. He has done things like start a magazine, but he's also started 14 restaurants. My favorite concept of his is a concept called mixtape. So imagine if you were going to make a mixtape into a restaurant. Jeremy did that. Anyway, we had a really fun conversation. I think you'll like Jeremy. And I actually joined him on his show called Dinner Party. So did Sean, my wife. And he does a really good job. He has some interesting questions. He's really into mental health, and he's open and transparent about his whole journey and struggle there. But if you want to find out more about Jeremy and what he's up to, we'll link information down below. But before we get into it, if you haven't subscribed to the show and given it a rating, please do so on whatever platform you're listening on. It really helps us out. Let's go ahead and jump into this one with Jeremy Fall. Jeremy Fall, it is truly an honor to meet you. Thanks for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you, man. You as well.
Hey, so I like to just kind of start the show by setting the scene of what the foundation of your life looked like. I know you have Tunisian and French roots. Talk to me about what your parents did, maybe what your upbringing was like, the potted version of who you are and how you've gotten to be where you are right now.
Yeah, so my mom is half Caribbean, half French. Her father was from Martinique, and she was born and raised in Paris. My father is, like you said, Tunisian, North Africa. I'm born and raised in LA, so, in Angelino,
nice.
Ride or die, some might say. I mean, I even have a palm tree tattooed on my arm. So, like really ride or die, Angelino. But yeah, so, obviously I grew up in a multicultural background. I think it was actually interesting because I would say that, growing up, I went to French schools, and it was interesting when I actually turned 18. I very briefly went to college, didn't last there very long, but yeah. I will say that it was the only time in my life where I felt somewhat a bit of a culture shock within my own city, which was strange because, I had never been immersed in a fully American surrounding. Even like my friends growing up were all from all around the world. As an international school. But yeah, so I my mother growing up owned a cafe with my ex-stepfather, who was a chef. My mother ran the restaurant. We actually lived on top of the restaurant. It was kind of like almost like a back kind of storage situation that we turned into a loft. So I lived above it. Our kitchen to our home was the kitchen of the restaurant. So I literally grew up in a restaurant. Yeah, it's great. In downtown LA. So I mean, you know LA well. So it pictured downtown LA 20 years ago. It's not downtown LA today.
Jeez.
Yeah. Jeez. So it's cool though. Yeah. So I grew up literally in a restaurant. So you could say it's in my blood.
It seems like the entrepreneurial spirit is also in your blood. I'm curious, you've been involved in event promotions. You've been involved in digital magazines. You've been involved with restaurants. I would love if you could start at your experience at Occidental College, which I had no idea, to be honest with you, that was I thought that was in Boston, and then I found out it is in LA, and it doesn't sound like you've ever left the city, but I would love to hear your decision in going and leaving, and then what happened next.
Yeah, so the event promotions was before. I did the event promotions when I was 16. So I started before I even went to college. I was helping run a nightclub called the Avalon in Hollywood, which, big music venue here. So I was doing that while going to school. And then I went to Occidental when I was 18 after I graduated. Most people think it's a dental school, so you're not the only one that I didn't know where it was. But yeah, I went to Occidental briefly. I was working on the side doing event promotions. That's when I had the magazine as well. It was just a little fashion music magazine I had on the side. But, my whole thing was, I feel like I grew up pretty quickly, and I always wanted to write my own rules. And there was something about the status quo of college that didn't work for me. And I don't know if that's like an ego thing or trying to prove everyone wrong that, the natural trajectory is going to college, then, getting a job, and then working your way up, and then getting married and all those things. To me, it was like, I think I wanted, part of it was rebellion, and part of it was just wanting to, to create my own thing and own that. And so I didn't like going to school, learning about biology, or the fact that I was 18 and people were asking me, like, what do you want to do for the rest of the next 70 years of your life? I'm like,
right.
Well, I have no idea. I'm 18. You know what I mean? So like, I didn't like that. So it didn't work well for me. I'm not obviously against, I'm a big proponent. I'm a big supporter of education in general, but yeah. I think that the way the system works in that regard, it's like, it just wasn't for me.
Yeah. That's so interesting. So you had enough things going on outside of school, or you knew that school wasn't for you? Like, were you stepping out into a abyss, or did you already have a side hustle going on?
I mean, I had side hustle. Like I was, working even before I was 21, I was working in nightclubs. I didn't drink or anything. I was sober that entire time, which most people find it shocking. But yeah, I was working in nightclubs and bars, and it wasn't that I was making like enough money that I could like just leave. I mean, I was doing relatively well for that age, but to me, it was more about, opportunity cost, in the sense that if I'm going to spend, let's say 40 hours, I don't know what school you're supposed to spend, like let's say 40 hours a week in school, and by the way, I'm also paying, I was lucky enough to get a full scholarship, but those also there's always fine print in those where you have to actually pay for certain things. But if I'm spending that time there, what could I be using that time for to build something that has a direct return on investment, right? So and also learning things about biology, chemistry, things that I really was confident I was not going to get into at any point in my life. So I would say that it was more so, there wasn't really another option for me, like in terms of like mentally, I was like, this just doesn't make sense. It's not like maybe it just doesn't make sense for me.
That's so interesting. You and I are different in that sense, where coming out of high school, my strong suit was English. I was like really good at writing. So I walk into college, I was like, what should I study? Probably engineering. I don't know why. It was a bad choice, but like in my mind, I was like, all right, I just want to I want to do as many things as I can to open up as many opportunities. And I'm now at the point in my life where I've realized that that's a flawed way to approach things. So I think your focus in saying, you know what, biology, I'm never going to do it is incredibly helpful, Yeah,
I mean, I think it's interesting. And I think maybe the grass is always greener, right? But to a certain extent, I think your way of thinking, especially at a certain time, in that time of your life, I actually think that that's a much smarter way of thinking than the way I did, right? Because I think the more doors you open, I've always been a firm believer that the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. And I think opening as many doors as possible. I mean, I could have exercised my brain in a way to learn about biology that could maybe help me in my creativity, like later on. Maybe, there's always a way to connect the dots somehow and bring things together. So keeping that open-mindedness, I think, is really important, and I think that having that like emotional and psychological maturity that you're talking about, I think is important. And look, I'm not, it seems to have worked out for both of us in different ways, but I think that way is actually like, what more can you ask for than just knowledge, right? And the more knowledge you have, no matter what, can't hurt you.
But yeah, so this is a tangent, but it's actually kind of an interesting discussion where it's like, I think if you approach it with, if you're still engaged in biology, even if you're never going to do biology, but you're like, hey, I can apply whatever in biology to my food making skills, right? Then like you're engaged and like your creative brain is working for connections. Anyway, that was just a thought I had. That was my deep thought of the day, Jeremy.
Yeah,
right there. That was it.
Yeah, I filled my quota too.
So where do you consider yourself on the spectrum of a creative versus businessman? Because you have a pretty wide breadth of experiences. I'm curious how you see yourself in that manner.
I thought the spectrum of insanity was what you were going for, which is probably something.
You maxed that out. You're all
I was going to say there's no spectrum. I'm beyond the spectrum. What I think is interesting is by the way, I don't have the actual answer to this. I ask myself this very often, and I would say that the interesting thing is I think business is a term that is too broad in the sense that there's business when you talk about finance, there's spreadsheets and stuff. I am a slob when it comes to that. I do not want to analyze numbers. I do not want to build X. I know how to do it now because I've learned, but it's not something I'm passionate about. And to me, if I don't want to do something that I'm good at, I want to do something that I'm great at, right?
Yeah.
So if someone is better at something than me, I want to have them do it. And I think that the smartest thing in business is knowing what you're not good at, right? As an entrepreneur. And I think as a human in general. So in my eyes, what gets me motivated, what gets me through the day, what gets me excited is creativity. That's like, without a doubt, if I don't have creativity in my life, I'm miserable, right? The business side to me has a part of creativity because there's something about, whether it be making deals or whatever, there's something in the human interaction of when you're doing business that I think requires a certain level of creativity. I mean, if you look at CEOs, a lot of CEOs are just faces, like charismatic faces that know how to convey a message for a brand or whatever it is and like have a mission, and it's people that they're dreamers, right? They're not necessarily the most intricate, finance people that are just writing numbers. Like a lot of these people are mostly dreamers. So in terms of the spectrum, it depends what day you ask me. There's days where I wake up and it's like the entrepreneur in me wants to just like take over the world. And there's days where I wake up where I just want to design, and I think the blend of that is interesting. It is a little bit difficult sometimes because, I have to teach my brain to think outside the box, but within a box sometimes where, I can design something. By the way, I designed all my restaurants. I'm working on a product line that I'm designing in full and everything. But I have to, in the restaurant space, it was interesting because I had to design things that had a level of science to them, which is a little bit more where the entrepreneurship comes in, where it's like a little bit more structured. So I can't go in and make chairs that you can't sit on, right? I have to design chairs that you can sit on. And sometimes I want to do chairs that only have, 2 legs and not 4. But I can't. I have to do them as 4.
That sounds stressful to me.
It's very stressful.
As a frequent user of chairs, 2 supporting legs.
Yeah, it's very stressful. But like I'm, the creative in me is like, why 2 legs? Why not 18 legs? And then like the business entrepreneur in me is like, you got to do 4 because the chair will collapse and you need structure.
Yeah, it is interesting. We've been around enough musicians or just pure artists to know that like there is a skill. I think it's a skill of knowing what, like, of all the crazy things you can create or dream up, there's a certain level that's like usable or practical or marketable. And like, I think being creative within that box it's important in one hand, but like, you don't want to completely sell out to, foregoing all of these peripheral ideas,
Yeah. And I think every creative's dream is to create without limits and never have to worry about finances. Like that's every person's dream. I'd love to wake up tomorrow and design low-income housing in the middle of the desert. And the next day wake up, and design buildings and then clothing. And then like, that's every creative's dream is to just do whatever they want. But there comes a point where you have to learn to find the creative challenge within the structure. And I think that's what separates the person who's going to like live in their basement and paint, which by the way, I envy a lot of times, like that level of just, or the person that's going to, sell 100 million, albums or whatever it is. I actually have a question for you.
All right, hit me.
I
didn't come prepared to answer questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I should have actually given you a heads up. And to me, I find athletes fascinating in general. I think what you guys do is is insane. I can't touch my knees. So I'm not in shape whatsoever. But do you find sports creative?
Wow, Jeremy.
Like, do you consider yourself an artist in some regard?
I think in the sense, so talking about boundaries, like a lot of times in organized athletics, there is like a finite end goal. So like a coach says, this is the play we're running, right? But for me as an athlete, I think I found success in like, I couldn't exit just because of my athletic ability, especially when I got to the NFL, was like not where my peers were. I had to be creative in how I could achieve that goal while being a lesser athlete, right? So like whether it was, it's like a similar creative focus of thinking outside the box of like, all right, if this is where we need to be and I can't go this route, what other route can I go? So I think in that sense, yes. Did that answer your question? That was...
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, obviously stripping away the entertainment aspect of it and whatnot. I think it's somewhat improvised performance, right? Because it's strategic in whatever sport you do. There's strategy. It's really adaptation, but it's also somewhat of a performance. Like I'm a big NBA fan, so Lakers, obviously.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. I was expecting. I didn't know how to bring it up, but thank you. I don't think any of those guys need to do a 360 before they dunk. I don't think they need to.
Okay. Yeah.
Or I don't think NFL players need to dance after they hit a touchdown.
No, so that's true. I mean, there is performance involved, right? Yeah. Like you like to have fun, but I think in the actual like athletic, like the competition portion, so like the 6 seconds an NFL play goes on the one hand, it's extremely instinctual, right? It's like you've practiced 1,000 times to do this, right? Which it kind of takes away from the creativity. But I guess you could argue that creativity is, man, this is getting philosophical, dog. Let me just think through this.
Yeah, so I didn't give you, I didn't warn you needed like an extra cup of coffee this morning.
Like football especially is like, all right, there's a human being running at me at 20 miles an hour. I just react, right? So that's not that creative. That's like fight or flight.
But it is creative because your brain has to work the same way that if I'm designing that restaurant and I have to anticipate how that person is going to experience something and what they're going to do. You have to anticipate actions. You can't run straight into this person. You have to spin or whatever it is you do, and excuse my lack of terminology, whatever it's called. You have to be able to do those things. Like
it is. Yeah. No, I you know what? I appreciate that. I think like bodybuilding. I don't know if you've ever seen Pumping Iron with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but the way he talks about it, it is like, wow, that's art. Like, it's like adding clay to the sculpture. Anyway, it's not as creative, I wouldn't say, as you came up with a restaurant called Mixtape.
Yeah.
What a unique blend of music and experience. Just use that as an example. I don't know if that's your favorite restaurant to talk about, but that's an example of your fantastic creativity.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, Mixtape to me was, music is one of my biggest passions, right? And to me, it was like, okay, cool. This is where my like rebellious, maybe part ego comes in, where I'm like, if I can't release an album, which by the way, I'm convinced that I probably could, but I won't put people under that. What is, if I were to release a mixtape in restaurant form, what would that look like, right? So it's going to be inspired by my multicultural background, the Tunisian and Jewish heritage, French, Caribbean, American, right? It's going to be a love letter to my city, to Los Angeles. It's going to feature other artists, just like an album, right? So it's going to feature Quincy Jones. It's going to feature Jaden Smith, all these different artists that we got, completely different. You have, some Serge Tankian from System of a Down, and then you have Quincy Jones. Also stripping them away from what they do. Quincy Jones is sketching. People are like, wait, I thought Quincy Jones did music. I'm like, no, that's creativity. You're not pigeonholed to one thing. That is, you have to find a way to break this in. People don't understand that. and then you have Serge Tankian doing a sculpture that's a lamp, that's a repurposed Yamaha keyboard. And then you sit down and the cocktail menu is a mood ring, right? So that was like my 90s inspiration coming in, growing up, and like, falling for all these girls that had these like mood rings that would change colors and like all that stuff when I was like a kid.
Mood rings.
Exactly. And then, when you're going there, you're like, wait, but this is a restaurant, but to me, it's like, yeah, it is a restaurant, but it doesn't have to be like, why does it have to be what you know? And it's interesting because the problem with that is that it's great. It's great for people like us who understand that, but you'd be surprised at how many people it's really hard to take them out of that box, right? And when, I have to support 65 employees in that one establishment that I have to pay their bills, I have to find a way to play the game where we can keep the lights on, right? I can't, if you ask me to do restaurant the way I'd want to 100%, it'd be, no one would get it. Like no one would get it. It'd make no sense. But you have to find a way, I think, to there's creativity in that challenge, right? Juggling.
Man, it almost gives me chills to think about. I guess my first parallel analogy to it was like a deaf person experiencing a symphony either through like the sound waves or literature through their feeling. It's like you're taking one of the five senses and projecting that experience on a different sense. It's so really cool.
Thank you.
But so in 2019, you had several of your restaurants acquired, which is a big deal, right? Rolling into this year, your Forbes 30 for 30, all the success that maybe you dreamed of, maybe you didn't dream of. I understand you hit this mental health, this point in mental health where you had to take a step back. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I suffer from anxiety and depression. I have my whole life. Growing up, I didn't know what it was. I was often made fun of as a kid because, I wouldn't get on the plate, like at the top of the slide, like the other kids did. My mother would say that I would put one foot on one step, another foot on the same step. And I would be uncomfortable in situations. I always felt like an outsider. I was called a lot of names and whatnot. And so that was something growing up. And my therapist even says, like, I talked to her about this. I was like, why do you think there's a stigma? And she's like, well, for men, the only emotion that men are allowed to feel in society is anger. And that's it. Because if it's sadness, I think you're considered as weak. And growing up, with that, and it was definitely like kind of an interesting way to integrate. I always saw it as an Achilles heel. And I think at a certain point, I started to, it's like, how do you reimagine that? How do you repurpose that as a superpower, right? As your advantage. And I honestly attribute my success to my anxiety and depression. I think if I didn't have that, I don't think I would have dropped out of school. I would have wanted to stay within that structure. All of those things. I'm grateful for it in a certain way. It's just how do you live with it as a certain thing, right? And I've been more open to over the years. It was very difficult for me to hit all these press accolades. Like I would say I've done a lot of growing up in the last year and a half or so. Because when I started in the restaurant business, it was very much about, okay, I need the validation to counteract all that childhood of feeling like the outsider, wanting to be at the theoretical lunch table, or metaphorical lunch table, I should say, getting invited to all those things. And from the outside, everyone thinks that I'm like, no one would ever think that I have that inside. Like I would tell people, like I would try to open up a high anxiety store, and they're like, no, like I don't believe that. You don't have anxiety. Like even doctors would tell me that. They'd be like, you don't have anxiety. You're such a like cool, chill guy. And I'm like, it was really difficult for me to open up about that. And I think that when I started working and started achieving success, it was like a drug. I chased every single press accolade, every single award. I was creating things that I knew, would stir up the conversation. I knew would like piss some people off and make some people happy. I went completely against the grain. to feed my ego to like get that confidence. And then I got to a point where I was like, this isn't me. This isn't authentic. Like, I'm going on Instagram, and look, everyone's Instagram, I would say, is like highlights of their lives. Like, no one is really fully, showing every single, and we shouldn't. There should be some part of secret privacy in our lives, right? But I was doing all these projects, and by the way, that I love, and each of them taught me something. I don't regret anything. I loved everything that, I'm proud of what we created over the years. But I hit a point where I was like, this isn't me. Like, the perception versus the reality is completely skewed. Like, I know there are kids out there that are, messaging me from all parts of the world that are like, I want to be just like you. I want this because like and I'm like, I have imposter syndrome as well. So that every award and accolade would hurt me more and more and more, to the point where I was like, I want to just be open about this thing. I want to help remove this stigma. I want to tell that kid that's like, oh, I wish I could be like Jeremy, but I can't because I have this like crippling anxiety or depression or whatever it is, or whatever mental health issue, thinking that would hinder them from following their dreams. I wanted to be open about it. So to answer your question, sorry for my rant, but to answer your question, I decided it was 2 months ago. I was, after quarantine, obviously quarantine made us all think a lot more. And during that time, I was, it was great in the sense where like, I really got to reflect on myself. It was difficult for a certain period of time, but I was like, what am I doing? I'm refreshing Instagram all day long. I'm looking at the little reports of like how long I spent there. It's embarrassing. I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, do I really care about seeing my friend in the pool? Not really. I'd rather see my friend in person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I decided to take 2 months off. I disconnected from all the apps, disconnected from everything. This is the first interview I've done, by the way, in like, I would say probably like 7 months, which going from what I was doing before, which was like multiple times a week, this is the first thing I've done. And I completely disconnected and didn't want to, touch the digital side, because I wanted to try to really feel and remember like who I was without that perception, and then come back. So I had to go in. I think a lot of creatives and people in general with mental health issues go through that. And I think that it's interesting to me that there's a stigma for mental health when if you have a sniffle, people are like, what, do you need antibiotics? Like Advil and sinus, like they're load you up with medication, but you have something that you have to live with every day, and medication or whatever, it's such a stigma. And I'm trying to help break that. I'm trying to make people understand that everyone has mental health. Mental health doesn't mean having issues. It's fragile. Someone can have great mental health and tomorrow it all goes away. And, so I'm trying to help people understand that.
First of all, I'm honored that things worked out as they did. And I think you said the first day back was or the day you read my message was your first day back on social media. So that's, and I'm, just glad you could join us, because I think you have some really great things to say. The second thing is, it's, when I think of an industry where anxiety that might impart anxiety, the restaurant industry is brutal in that sense. I have some friends that own restaurants, and it's like long hours, a lot of things being thrown at you, a lot of decisions and chaos and problems. And so, I envy your courage in taking that on. And then the last thing is, as far as, the social media where you're wasting time, it's like, I've just put so much thought into, okay, if creativity is my joy and it's my profession, how can I do more of it? I've put thought and research into how to amplify that. And it's like, pretty much everybody says you kind of have to reach a point of boredom to tap into your creativity, right? It's like you have to let your mind relax. And you don't do that by, I have 4 seconds where I'm going to, pee. Let me pull out my phone and pull up Instagram. It's like, it's our first impulse is to grab the phone and push boredom to the side. But creatively and from a sense of community, I think it's terrible. So anyway, hats off to you for like really going after it and making that change where I honestly, my first thought was, well, I can't delete social media. This is, part of what we do, but that's just an excuse at the end of the day, So it's like, you did it. Hats off.
Look, ultimately, if you went off social for, let's say, a week, you still have, and again, congrats on your baby.
Appreciate it, dude. Of
course, you still have the things that matter the most. You still have your wife, you still have your baby, you still have your home, you still have your health. Like, ultimately, I think when we take a step back for all the things, whether we take them for granted or not, I think there's so much value that is ignored because of that. And again, it's like I had that thought with opportunity cost when I was young, and like spending like that stuff I was doing on social media to a certain extent was that those 40 hours a week in college. It's like, yeah, there's some benefit to it, but find a way, like if you're spending 10 hours a week, I'm sure you could get the same stimulation by spending 2, and it's like, what are you going to do those 8 hours? Like, what are you going to do? Build things that are meaningful. Don't just focus on building the things that have true value. That's my opinion on things, and it doesn't mean that you have to like obsess by the tea of like every minute, every day. No, like there's like, you can spend a Sunday on Instagram, watch trash TV and scroll through. Absolutely. Or TikTok. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't want people to think that it's like,
sure,
but to a certain extent, I think know your worth and try to understand what makes you happy, and remember that what's on our phones is just, it's that perception versus reality, right? And I think even though people know that, they're still feeding off of other people's perception, trying to chase something that doesn't exist, and that's the issue, underlying issue.
Yeah. Hey, Jeremy, I'm curious, when you look back over your life to date, all the things you've done, all the people you've interacted with, what are 3 things that you've learned or someone has taught you that you could share with the audience?
I think the main thing by far is stay true to yourself, stay authentic. That is something that you will never regret. And I actually think that by doing that, you do things at your best ability. People can cut through all that. They can see if you're not being authentic. Like, do things that you actually love that are very much you, and people will buy into that. And honestly, it's happiness. That's all it comes down to. I would say that's number 1. That's a pretty big one that probably hits a few of those, but I think the power of no is more important than the power of yes. I took on a lot. Yeah. I took on a lot of things that I learned from, but I learned that most of my success came based off of how many no's I, said or whatever it is. I think those are the 2. And honestly, I think figuring out, and this is something that I think is difficult, where there's people that are like, how do I have a personal life and a professional life? How do I have both? What I think is important to understand is that they don't have to be separate lives. I know that there's this whole thing about work-personal balance, and there is. But I think if you do what you love, like people always ask me, like, well, what would, how do you have that? What do you do on your spare time? And I would be like, obviously I love a lot of different things, but I'd be like, spare time, I go to restaurants to eat with people I love. And it's because, like, to me, I was never interested in food because of the food. Like, I love food, but to me, food is a conduit to conversation, right? Yeah. And what I love is the context around food and the stories that get built around and the memories that you build. That's what interests me about food. And that's what I loved about restaurants, was like creating these worlds where people could build memories and have these experiences. So find something that is, again, authentic and just streams through your life. Like, if you love sports, you love watching sports, it's everything that consumes you, and you're going to be an athlete, you don't have to be an athlete and be a dad. You can be both at the same time. You don't have to have separate lives. I think that's an important thing, is finding a way to make everything one. And that's when it'll be, again, authentic to you. You don't feel like you have to play a role. Like, I used to think that I had to be like Jeremy Fall and then Jeremy. And I realized that there's a way to just be Jeremy all across. Like, you don't need to have this separate thing and be the specific thing that you want people to think you are. Just be yourself.
Yeah, be yourself with a outstanding beard. Just keep that thing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm very lucky that my facial hair grows back within an hour. I shaved before we got this call.
Bro, I shaved when I was 16, and this is where I'm at.
I never came back. Yeah, there's something.
Oh, man.
It's funny because I don't even consider myself having a beard. People always bring it up. I just I don't shave. I just trim, and then for some reason it comes off like this.
Hey, so what exciting things do you have coming up?
I've been, again, like the past 2 months, I've been really just figuring myself out and everything. I actually am working on a really cool product line. It's a design project that has a mental health mission tied to it. So that's coming out next year. I'm very excited about that. And then I have a show coming out soon as well.
Hey, Jay Fall on TV. Back again.
Back again. Yeah.
Wow.
How about you? Am I allowed to interview you back?
You know what, man? We have a fun project. So I don't know if you're familiar with these content houses that are popping up, most of them in LA.
I'm not living under a rock. I just went off for 2 months.
So we create family-friendly content, right? And most of those content houses are like 20-year-olds, certain lifestyle that we're not currently interested in, I guess, in our phase of life. And so we're trying to figure out what would if we were going to do a family content house, what does that look like? So we're taking some fun steps to make that happen. And the mission is ultimately people view our videos and pictures and read what we put out there, but we come from one perspective and one background. And, we realize there's a bunch of other families and family situations out there. So how can we increase we think family is a pretty powerful unit. And so how can we increase people feeling encouraged in their families, people feeling connected in their families? And that's kind of our overarching mission. And we're doing a bunch of stuff to try to make that happen. And anyway, you'll have to come to Nashville and see what's up.
I'll come cook.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I would say you should come and we could do some sports, but that sounds terrible.
Yeah, we could do sports sometimes. Hey, Jeremy, thank you for your time, man. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks for having me, man. Thank you.